Unpacking racism in the gay dating community. Hey guys, Michael Pizzulo here, psychotherapist in West Hollywood, working with gay men and gay couples. So many people have asked me to touch on this topic, and it's definitely a complex one. So I want to do it lightly and offer you a few ideas about the racism in the gay dating scene, the gay world, and specifically what I'm talking about really comes to sexuality. I'm not talking about racial bias when it comes to friendship, employment, power structures. Those are other, very important conversations. I want to talk specifically about gay hookup culture and how race plays a role into that in a few different ways, and hopefully you'll find this useful. So the first thing I want to unpack really is the difference between preference and prejudice. So obviously everyone has some sort of sexual template, right? Of, characteristics that you find attractive, whether it's tall, short, big, small, facial features, masculine, feminine, whatever. And yes, race can play a role in that as well. A lot of gay men find that they are drawn to certain, skin colors and textures and aesthetics and so on and so forth, right? And I want to, give some normalization to the idea that everyone is allowed to follow their natural desires and natural interests. And that's kind of the whole point of gay liberation, right? Is that we're giving ourselves permission to follow our organic sexual interests. On the other hand, you also want to think about, is there any prejudice or racial bias that's coming into the picture? And how can I begin to think about that? So when we think about racial bias, we really want to think about representation, right? So we want to think about what are the certain aesthetics that are celebrated in our community and what we've been exposed to. So if you look at, obviously media representation of gay people is very short, just in general, right? But generally speaking, for what we do have, it was kind of stereotypically like, buff white guys for a good chunk of time that you would see at pride parades and so on and so forth. And over the last, couple decades, obviously things have gotten much more diverse. Gay folks tend to go to metropolitan cities where it's more liberal and more diverse culturally anyway. So we see much more representation, but when we think of like mainstream TV and mainstream movies, I think it does go without saying that most of the representation that we're seeing in gay culture is not particularly diverse. I noticed this, with that new show, which I'm sure you're all watching, Heated Rivalry, that one of the main characters is half Korean, and you're looking at him and thinking like, yeah, I rarely see like an Asian gay man on TV. That kind of, caught my attention in thinking about how much of our interests are impacted by what we're just exposed to. And this isn't really to blame us or to blame us, but it's to think about, what am I being exposed to? And does that play a role in what I find myself naturally drawn to, when I open up an app, for example? The other thing I think that makes this so complicated is when we think about prejudice, we're often thinking about unconscious bias. And people talk about unconscious bias like, you got to check your unconscious bias and you got to fix your unconscious bias. And it kind of makes no sense, because if it's something is unconscious, you don't have control over it. You don't have awareness of it. So the concept of me having some sort of unconscious bias is really recognizing that I may have a blind spot and I'm blind to this spot, meaning that I don't exactly know what's gone into it. So rather than trying to pretend that I can have conscious awareness over something that's unconscious, I think what we want to do is have some humility and curiosity of, is there a part of my psychology or even my sexuality in this case that I just don't really quite understand yet, that maybe has been influenced by culture and media in a way that I'm not totally aware of? And who knows, maybe gay men in 100 years will have very different sexual interests that will show us that, media representation and exposure does play a huge role in what we find ourselves naturally gravitating toward. So I think the unconscious bias conversation is less about, unbrainwashing yourself and recognizing that we've all probably been a little bit brainwashed, and having some sort of humility and understanding around that, rather than pretending that I can just, break the code and remove any kind of racial bias that's been programmed into me just because I live in a world that celebrates certain aesthetics over others. Particularly maybe like white and European aesthetics over others. And then the last thing I'll say too, just in terms of etiquette, and I'm not someone who's into, policing language or behavior in particular, However, you know, when you go on these apps and you see people blatantly putting these taglines of like, literally like no blacks, Asians, or whatever, I think that is just gross behavior, truly. No one is forcing you to hook up with someone that you're not interested in. And so everyone's allowed to filter out based off of their authentic preferences. No one's demanding that you hook up with someone that you don't want to. But I do think that putting language like that out there is unnecessary. It's demeaning. And I think truly what it really does is it just signals to other people that this person's kind of a dick. I don't think it makes them look good. I don't think it's productive. And I think if you were interested, if you were, you know, a white guy and you were interested in another white guy and you saw that in his profile, it'd probably be a turnoff because it just seems like unnecessarily rude. So I do think, you know, hey, it's your profile, do what you want. I'm not trying to tell people how to language things, but I do think that it catches other people's attention. And if you are the person who's doing that and putting that kind of language or racial language in your profile, I would consider that it may not be landing particularly well with anyone, and it's really just not necessary. And again, no one's forcing anyone to hook up with someone they're not interested in, but putting language like that out there does feel to me like just mean-spirited. So those are my general thoughts. I know it's a complicated topic, and you know, it touches on how media portrays gay people and how gay culture, you know, how we celebrate one another. And I think that we should make an effort to explore all kinds of different gay aesthetics and beauty types and be curious about them and, you know, and that sort of a thing, while also recognizing that we're not trying to force people to, you know, mold their sexuality in a way that's not organic to them, because that kind of bleeds back into, you know, homophobia language where you could just sort of force yourself to be straight. So I do think there's sort of a complicated line between sexual liberation and also curiosity and permission. So those are my general thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. I know this is a complicated topic, and I do want to own that I say all of this as a white guy. I'm Italian. I'm sure my last name gives that away. So I don't think anyone can have this conversation in a completely unbiased way, because we all have a ethnicity and we all have a race that we bring to the world, and it informs how we interact with the community and the gay community and the culture at large. And so I don't think there's any way to get around that other than just acknowledging that we all have some sort of bias based on our own lived experience. But anyway, really curious to hear what you guys think. If there are ways that you think we can balance preference and prejudice, I do think that's a gentle way to go about discussing this topic in a way that doesn't feel attacking or too harsh, but also invites just curiosity and interest. So that's enough out of me. Let me know what you guys think. As always, please subscribe to my channel if you like this type of content. And if you want to work with me as a therapist or as a coach, you can book a free consult with me. The link will be in the description, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks, guys.